I always thought I had a good marriage. Jane and I had been together for almost 10 years. We met back in college, got married young, and built what I thought was a solid life together. She was my best friend. Or at least I thought she was until last Tuesday night. I was just trying to print a couple of documents for work, so I went into our home office and used Jane's laptop because mine was dead. It was supposed to be a quick thing. Just click print, and I'd be done. But the moment I opened her email, a notification popped up. It was from a Chad. Now I know Chad. He's one of Jane's coworkers, the classic nice guy type everyone loves. The guy who makes you feel like you're overreacting just because he's a little too friendly. I shrugged it off, assuming it was probably work-related. But then the preview of the message caught my eye. Something like, "Last night was amazing. I can't stop thinking about you." I was frozen. My mind raced. I knew opening her emails was wrong, but I clicked on it anyway. What I found confirmed my worst fears. Their messages were detailed, embarrassingly so. He called her baby, told her he loved her. It wasn't just some fling, this was something that had been going on for a while. Honestly, I sat there numb, just scrolling through months of messages. It was like she was someone else entirely. All the little things I'd noticed over the last few months, the extra late nights at work, the times she'd been on her phone a little too long, suddenly clicked. She'd been lying to my face, living a double life with this guy. After hours of staring at the screen, I didn't even feel like myself. I kept hearing my brother's advice from years ago. He always told me, if you ever get betrayed, don't react right away. Think it through. Make it count. So that's what I did. I shut her laptop, took a deep breath, and started planning. This time, I wasn't going to be the guy who just got walked over. I was angry, so angry that I didn't trust myself to confront Jane yet. I needed a plan, something that would shake her world the way she destroyed mine. And as I sat there, my brother's advice kept echoing in my mind, make it count. I started with Chad. I knew he was married to a woman named Sarah. We'd met at a couple of company gatherings, and she always struck me as a solid, no-nonsense kind of person. If anyone deserved to know what was going on, it was her. But I didn't want to just send her a message or dump the screenshots in her inbox. This had to be impactful. So I reached out to her on social media, keeping it casual. I figured, let her think I had something important to discuss in person, not something to ruin her day over text. After a couple of days, she replied and agreed to meet up. We met at a local coffee shop, just a few miles from her place. I was a mess, but I did my best to keep it together. When she sat down across from me, I could tell she had no idea what was coming. I wasted no time, showing her the screenshots right there on my phone. Watching her face go from confusion to horror was almost too much to handle. She sat in silence, her eyes welling up as she scrolled through each message. Finally, she looked up at me, her hands shaking. "How long have you known?" she whispered, her voice thick with shock. "Since Tuesday," I replied, "but I needed to make sure you knew before I did anything." She nodded, letting out a shaky breath. "We can't let them get away with this." That was all I needed to hear. We spent the next hour hashing out a plan. Sarah wanted revenge just as badly as I did, and together, we came up with something that would hit them where it hurt. We decided to set up a double date, something so unexpected that Jane and Chad wouldn't see it coming. We'd confront them on our terms, not behind closed doors where they could weasel their way out. Over the next few days, Sarah and I kept in touch, coordinating the details. We picked a popular bar in town where Jane and Chad were known to hang out. If we timed it right, we'd bump into them while they were wrapped up in each other, caught in their cozy little fantasy. The goal was to break that illusion in the most public, humiliating way possible. The night finally came. Sarah showed up looking stunning, dressed to kill. If Chad was looking for excitement, he was about to see exactly what he'd lost. I'd put on my best suit, trying to mask the storm brewing underneath. We exchanged a nervous smile as we walked into the bar, acting like two people out for a fun night. Sure enough, we spotted them tucked away in a booth at the back, leaning in close, laughing like they hadn't a care in the world. They were so absorbed in each other that they didn't notice us right away. Sarah looked at me, her eyes narrowed with determination. "Ready," she whispered. I took a deep breath, forcing down the wave of anger. "Let's do this." We walked right up to their table, and the moment they looked up and saw us, their expressions turned from relaxed to absolute panic. Jane's eyes went wide, her mouth opening like she was about to say something, but no words came out. Chad looked like a deer caught in headlights, his face flushing red as he shifted in his seat, clearly scrambling for an excuse. Before either of them could speak, Sarah leaned in close to me, resting her hand on my arm. Without missing a beat, she looked up at me with a smile that practically dripped with sweetness. Then she whispered, loud enough for them to hear, "I'm so glad we could finally have this night together, Jack." I didn't hesitate. I wrapped my arm around her, letting her pull me close as I pressed a kiss on her cheek. The look on Jane's face was priceless: hurt, disbelief, maybe even a touch of jealousy. Sarah was really laying it on, and I just went along, trying to keep my anger in check. I could feel the tension building in the air, and it was only a matter of time before one of them snapped. Chad was the first to speak up, his voice trembling. What's going on here?" I looked straight at him, holding back the urge to laugh. "I think that's my question to you, Chad. Or maybe Sarah's got a few questions of her own." Sarah didn't skip a beat. "Yeah, Chad, why don't you explain?" Or better yet, she turned to Jane, her voice laced with mock concern. "Jane, would you like to explain to your husband?" Jane's face went pale. She stammered, looking between me and Chad, but the words just wouldn't come. Then, as if the weight of the situation finally hit her, she stood up abruptly, her eyes filling with tears. Without saying a word, she turned and bolted from the bar, leaving Chad alone, squirming under our glares. Chad looked like he'd rather be anywhere else in the world. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, like he was struggling to find something, anything, to justify himself. The guy couldn't even meet our eyes. He finally managed to mutter, It's not what it looks like." I scoffed, folding my arms. "Really, Chad? Because from where I'm standing, it looks exactly like what I found on Jane's laptop. And I think you know what I'm talking about." Sarah crossed her arms, her gaze steady on Chad. "Come on, Chad. Do you even have an explanation, or are you just going to sit there like a coward?" She leaned in, her voice low but intense. "You know, I thought you were a better man than this. Guess I was wrong." He squirmed, looking back and forth between us, then gave some weak attempt at a smile, like he was trying to lighten the mood. "Look, it was a mistake. Things got complicated and Oh, complicated?" Sarah cut him off, voice dripping with sarcasm. "Complicated, huh? Because from the way you two were messaging, it didn't look complicated. It looked like you were having a grand old time behind our backs." Chad swallowed hard, his shoulders slumping. I'm sorry, okay?" His voice was barely a whisper now. "It just happened, and I didn't mean for anyone to get hurt." I shook my head, feeling disgusted. "Didn't mean for anyone to get hurt?" I repeated, my voice rising. "That's rich, Chad. You think this is just about hurt feelings? You tore apart two families here. You took everything we trusted and threw it out the window because you were bored or whatever excuse you're about to give me." At that, Chad's gaze finally met mine, but he had nothing to say. He just sat there, a beaten man, looking for some way out of this mess he'd created. For a second, he looked like he wanted to bolt, just like Jane had, but he seemed to know there was no point. Then Sarah leaned in, her tone deadly calm. "Here's what's going to happen, Chad. You're going to pack up your things and leave the house by the end of the week. And when I'm done with you, you'll be lucky if you have a toothbrush left. Got it?" Chad nodded, his face white as a sheet, mumbling something that sounded like yes. But I wasn't done. "And Jane," I said, my voice steady but hard, "don't bother coming back tonight. I'll have your things packed and ready at the door. I don't need explanations. I don't need excuses. You made your choice." Chad looked up at that, eyes wide, like he just now realized the full weight of what he'd done. I gave him one last, hard look. I hope it was worth it. Without another word, Sarah and I turned and walked out of that bar, leaving him alone in the booth, his head down, his world crashing around him just like ours had days before. Outside, Sarah exhaled, shaking her head. That was cathartic. She gave a small, humorless laugh. "You know, I didn't think it would feel this good to see him finally face the consequences. But here we are." I nodded, feeling the same strange mix of relief and exhaustion. "Yeah, it's a start." We stood there in silence for a moment, both of us processing the whirlwind of the night. Then she looked at me, her expression softening. "Hey, thank you for telling me, for bringing this to light. I don't know how long he would have kept lying if you hadn't." I nodded, finally allowing myself to smile a little. I guess we both deserved better than this. She looked down, nodding. Yeah, we really did. After we left the bar, I walked Sarah back to her car. It felt like we'd just been through a battle together, exposing the truth, tearing down their lies. Now that it was over, a wave of exhaustion hit me. I could see the same in Sarah's eyes, but under it was this strange look, almost like relief. We had both survived, and we were free in a way we hadn't felt in a long time. We leaned against her car, both of us staring off into the quiet night, letting the cool air calm us. So, she said after a while, what now? Honestly. I sighed. I have no idea. Part of me just wants to be done with it, to move on and never look back. But then, I know that's going to take a lot of time. This whole thing, it's going to be hard to shake. She nodded slowly. Yeah, I get that. I spent years building a life with Chad, thinking he was my partner, you know? And now it's like, everything I thought I knew is just gone. She looked at me, and for a moment, her vulnerability caught me off guard. It's like grieving for someone who's still alive. I felt that one. Jane might be out of the house by morning, but that didn't mean the memories, the betrayal, the pain would leave with her. Yeah, it feels like everything's just changed. Sarah gave a small, sad smile. Maybe it has. But maybe that's okay. We exchanged numbers, mostly to keep each other updated about the next steps with lawyers, the mess of finances, all the things we'd need to navigate now. But there was something else there, too, a quiet understanding that neither of us had to face this alone. Look, if you ever want to talk or just vent, I'm here, she said softly. I get it. More than most people will. Same goes for you, I replied, meaning every word. There was a comfort in knowing that she was going through this too, someone who understood without needing explanations. After a beat, Sarah pulled me into a hug, one that felt genuine, grounding. We held on for a moment, finding some strength in each other. As she pulled away, she looked up at me and smiled. Just a small, tired smile, but it was real. Thanks, Jack. For everything. Take care, Sarah, I said, watching her get into her car. She gave me a little wave as she drove off, and for the first time since this whole thing started, I felt like maybe, just maybe, things would eventually be okay. After Sarah drove off, I sat in my car for a while, just letting the quiet settle over me. It was strange, feeling both relief and emptiness at the same time. I'd exposed Jane's affair, confronted her in a way she'd never forget, but now there was nothing left except moving forward. When I finally pulled into my driveway, I could see the lights on in the living room. Jane hadn't come home yet, which was a relief, but I knew she would eventually. Part of me wanted to be asleep when she did, to avoid another confrontation, but I knew I wouldn't be able to rest until she faced the reality of what she'd done. I went inside, grabbed a couple of boxes, and started packing her things. I wasn't doing it to be cruel, I just knew I couldn't stand the sight of her stuff cluttering up my space anymore. Each drawer I opened felt like peeling back another layer of hurt, clothes we'd bought on vacations, framed pictures from trips, notes she'd left around the house. All those things, once so full of meaning, now felt hollow, like remnants of a life that had ended long before tonight. I was deep in thought, folding her clothes into one of the boxes, when I heard the door open. Jane stood there in the doorway, her face puffy, eyes red from crying. She looked down at the boxes, and her face fell even further. Jack, please can we just talk, she said, her voice trembling. I took a breath, trying to keep calm. There's not much left to say, Jane. I know about Chad. I know everything. She flinched, taking a step back as if my words had physically hurt her. Jack, I'm so sorry. I never meant for this to happen. It just... don't. I cut her off, my voice cold. I don't want to hear the excuses. This didn't just happen. You lied to me, to our friends, to yourself. And for what? Because you were bored? Because you needed, what? Excitement. She looked down, tears spilling over. I don't know. I was selfish, and I know that. I thought I could keep it separate from us, that it wouldn't affect what we had. She looked up at me, desperate. But I was wrong. I know I was wrong. I shook my head. You were more than wrong, Jane. You destroyed everything we built together. I felt my voice crack, but I kept going, the hurt turning into a simmering anger. Do you know how humiliating this was? How it felt to find out from messages on your laptop that the woman I trusted completely was living a double life. Her face crumpled as she let out a choked sob. "Please, Jack. Just give me a chance to make it right. We can fix this." I looked at her, the woman I'd once thought was my partner, my confidant, my everything. "I don't think there's anything left to fix, Jane. I think you already made your choice." She was silent, her shoulders shaking as the weight of my words settled over her. And for the first time since I discovered the truth, I felt a sense of calm. The hurt was still there, but the uncertainty was gone. I knew what I needed to do, and there was no going back. "Tomorrow, I'll have a list of things for you to sort out with the lawyers," I said, heading toward the stairs. "And by then, I want you out of here." Without waiting for her response, I left her standing in the living room, surrounded by the remnants of a life that wasn't hers anymore. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, the memories of the past few days replayed in my head, the discovery of the messages, the confrontation at the bar, the look on Jane's face when I told her to leave. But more than anything, I kept thinking about how things would change from here on out. There was no easy way forward, but at least now, I could see a path. The next morning, I woke up early. I didn't expect Jane to be gone yet, but the silence in the house felt different, heavier. When I went downstairs, I found a note from her on the kitchen counter. "Jack, I'm sorry. I know that doesn't change anything, but I need you to know. I'll stay with my sister for a while. I'll respect your wishes, but please, let's talk about the next step soon. J." I stared at the note, feeling a strange mix of relief and resentment. Her apology, while long overdue, felt empty. Maybe it was genuine, but it was too little, too late. I crumpled the note and tossed it into the trash, not wanting her words to linger any longer than they had to. Later that day, I reached out to a lawyer to start the divorce process. They laid out the basics of what I'd need, what Jane would need, and the various hoops we'd have to jump through to get everything sorted. The whole thing felt surreal. There I was, talking about dividing assets and legal separation, like our entire relationship was just another contract waiting to be broken down. But I knew I had to keep moving forward. Dwelling on it wouldn't do me any good. Just as I was leaving the lawyer's office, I got a message from Sarah. She had been busy getting her own life in order, packing up Chad's things, contacting her own attorney, and moving ahead as quickly as I was. She asked if I'd like to grab a coffee, saying she wanted to catch up after everything that happened at the bar. We met at a small cafe in town. Sarah looked exhausted, but determined, the same look I probably had in my own eyes. We ordered coffee, sat down at a small table near the window, and for a while, neither of us said anything. It was just nice, sitting there, not feeling the need to fill the silence with empty words. It was like we both knew we didn't need to explain the hurt, the anger, the betrayal. We understood each other without speaking. Finally, Sarah broke the silence. "So, it's done? She's out of the house." I nodded, taking a sip of my coffee. "Yeah, she left this morning. It feels strange, like I'm living in someone else's house." She nodded in understanding. "I get it. I still feel that way, even though I'm the one staying. Every corner, every little thing, it just reminds me of what I thought I had." "And now," she trailed off, looking out the window. After a moment I said, "It's like grieving someone who isn't gone, but they're just not the same person they used to be." She looked back at me, her eyes softening. "Exactly. That's it. And it's lonely, you know? Even though we're both going through the same thing, it's still lonely." I nodded, feeling the truth of her words sink in. "Yeah, lonely." She smiled faintly. "But maybe it doesn't have to be," she said, looking down at her coffee, almost shyly. Her words hung in the air between us, and for a moment, I wasn't sure how to respond. Part of me wanted to dive into whatever this was, to find comfort in something, or someone, who understood my pain without needing an explanation. But another part of me was wary, cautious of jumping into anything too soon. Still, there was something comforting about Sarah. We had both been blindsided, and both of us were fumbling our way through the wreckage of our lives. She understood me in a way that no one else could right now. "You're right," I said softly, looking down at my coffee, feeling the edges of a smile start to form. "Maybe it doesn't have to be." Sarah looked up, relief flashing in her eyes, and we both chuckled, a little awkwardly, a little nervously. It felt good to laugh, even if just for a second. That laughter was like a bridge between the life I'd lost and whatever lay ahead. We stayed at the cafe for a while, just talking. We talked about everything from our favorite places in town to our future plans, dancing around the mess with Jane and Chad but not needing to dwell on it. With Sarah, I felt like I could breathe again. Then, as the afternoon light started to fade, she looked at me with that same soft, shy smile. "Do you want to take a walk?" "Sure," I replied, surprising myself. I wasn't really in the mood to head back home to my half-empty house, and walking with Sarah felt like a way to delay the inevitable return to reality. We strolled through the quiet streets, talking about everything and nothing. The conversation flowed naturally, as if we'd known each other forever. I could see why she'd caught Chad's attention, though for very different reasons than his own selfish motives. She was genuine, thoughtful, and there was an easy warmth about her that made you feel seen, understood. We ended up in a small park near her house, and after a while, we found a bench to sit on. The evening air was crisp, and the silence around us was calm, different from the tense, awkward silences that had filled my home lately. As we sat there, watching the leaves drift down from the trees, she reached out and placed her hand on mine. Her touch was light, hesitant, but comforting. I turned my hand over and held hers, feeling the warmth, the connection between us. We sat like that for a while, no words needed, both of us just taking in the quiet moment. Finally she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what the future holds, Jack. I don't even know if I'm ready for whatever this is. But I like being here with you." I squeezed her hand, a smile breaking through. "I feel the same. Whatever this is, let's just take it slow. No expectations. Just be here for each other." She nodded, her smile mirroring mine. "I think I'd like that." And in that quiet moment, under the falling leaves, I felt a spark of hope again. Over the next few weeks, Sarah and I fell into a routine. We didn't label whatever was happening between us, but we spent more time together, sharing dinners, venting about our days, and helping each other through the endless legal meetings, dividing assets, and late-night phone calls with lawyers. Knowing she was going through the same thing made everything just a little easier to handle. It wasn't a fairy tale or some quick fix to the pain. It was real, raw, and messy. But it was also genuine. Most nights, we'd sit in my living room or her kitchen, just talking about our days or swapping stories from before all of this, when life was simpler, when trust wasn't something we questioned. One night, Sarah showed up at my door holding a couple of takeout bags and a bottle of wine. She grinned as she walked in, kicking off her shoes. "Figured we could use a little comfort food and something to drink that isn't coffee for once." I chuckled, taking the bags from her. "You read my mind. I haven't eaten anything that didn't come out of a microwave in days." We set the food out on the coffee table and sat on the floor, digging into the burgers and fries like it was a 5-star meal. Sarah poured us each a glass of wine, and as we clinked glasses, I felt this wave of gratitude wash over me. It was strange how a simple meal and good company could bring me more comfort than anything else had in a long time. Halfway through our meal, she asked, "So when did you know? About Jane, I mean." I took a deep breath, the memory still fresh and painful. It was an accident, really. I was using her laptop for something, and a message from Chad popped up. One thing led to another, and I found months of messages. I paused, swirling my wine. I never thought I'd be the guy blindsided by his own wife, you know? I thought we were solid. Sarah nodded, her face reflecting the understanding I'd come to rely on. "I get it. Chad was always the charmer, the nice guy everyone loved. I thought he was happy with me, that he had everything he wanted." She took a sip of wine, her gaze softening as she looked over at me. "I guess sometimes people just want more, even if they have everything they need." I thought about that for a moment, nodding slowly. "Yeah, but you know what? I don't think I need to understand why anymore. I don't want to waste any more energy on them." Sarah looked at me, a faint smile crossing her lips. "Neither do I." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of that realization settling over us. Then, almost instinctively, she leaned her head against my shoulder, and I wrapped my arm around her, pulling her close. There was a warmth between us that wasn't forced or rushed. It was just right. I didn't know where things would go with Sarah, or if we'd even make it past this phase. But in that moment, none of that mattered. We were just two people, healing side by side, helping each other rebuild from the wreckage. And for the first time in months, I felt like maybe, just maybe, something good could come from all this pain. The weeks drifted by, and life took on a strange kind of rhythm. Sarah and I continued to see each other, and while we didn't call it dating, there was an undeniable connection growing between us. We weren't rushing anything, just letting things unfold naturally, and it felt good to have someone who understood, who didn't need me to explain every raw feeling or every hesitation. We just got each other. One Saturday afternoon, Sarah suggested we drive out to the lake a few miles from town. It was one of those crisp fall days with a bite in the air, leaves swirling down in colors of red and orange, and we both needed a break from the intensity of everything: lawyers' paperwork, the emotional weight we'd been carrying. I was all for it. The lake was peaceful, almost deserted. We found a quiet spot by the water, spreading out an old plaid blanket Sarah had brought along. We sat side by side, sipping hot coffee from a thermos, just watching the sunlight dance on the lake's surface. After a while, Sarah broke the silence. You know, I always thought I had everything figured out. I had this picture-perfect idea of what my life would look like. She laughed, a hint of bitterness in her voice. Married to a guy who was my best friend, a house with a big yard, maybe kids someday. Turns out none of that was real. I nodded, feeling the truth of her words. I know what you mean. I thought Jane was my forever. I thought we'd grow old together, face everything side by side. But I guess she didn't see things the same way. Sarah took a deep breath, looking out at the water. I used to blame myself, you know? Like maybe I wasn't enough, or I did something wrong. But lately, I've started to think maybe it wasn't about me at all. Maybe it was just them, and their own need to chase something they couldn't even define. I looked over at her, admiring her strength. She'd been through the same betrayal, the same humiliation, yet she wasn't letting it define her. She was finding her way, and in doing so, she was helping me find mine. Yeah, I said softly, letting the words settle between us. I think you're right. It wasn't about us. It was about them, their own emptiness, their own selfishness. I paused, letting out a small laugh. I guess that's something I'm still learning to believe. Sarah reached over, placing her hand over mine. You'll get there. We both will. Her touch was gentle, grounding, and it was as if the weight of everything, the betrayal, the anger, the resentment, felt a little lighter. We sat there, hand in hand, staring out at the lake. The silence was comfortable, healing. For once, there was no pressure to talk, no need to fill the quiet. We just existed in that moment, letting the calmness settle over us. Eventually she turned to me, her eyes soft but full of that quiet resolve I'd come to admire. Jack, I know this sounds strange, but, as much as I hate what happened to us, I'm starting to think maybe it was for the best. I looked at her, surprised. Really? You think so? She nodded, her gaze unwavering. Yeah. I mean, it hurt like hell, and it turned my whole life upside down, but it forced me to really look at what I wanted. I don't think I ever did that before. I was so focused on keeping things perfect, making everything look right. But now, she shrugged, giving a little smile. Now I'm free to figure out what I actually need. I thought about that for a moment, letting her words sink in. It was a strange, unexpected feeling, to look at the pain and see something good in it. But she was right. The betrayal, as devastating as it was, had stripped away all the illusions, left us raw and honest with ourselves. It made me realize that I wanted more than just a stable marriage. I wanted something real, something I could trust. Yeah, I said finally, squeezing her hand. Maybe this is the chance we needed. A chance to actually build something that matters. She smiled, and in that moment, I felt this spark of hope that maybe we were both on the verge of something new, something genuine. As the sun began to set, we packed up the blanket and headed back to the car. On the drive home, we didn't say much, but the silence between us felt different, more peaceful. The weight of everything was still there, but it was lighter somehow, shared between us. When we pulled up in front of her house, Sarah turned to me, her eyes searching mine. Jack, I know we're both still figuring things out, and I don't want to rush anything. But I'm glad you're here. I'm glad we're going through this together. I reached out, tucking a stray piece of hair behind her ear. Me too, Sarah. I don't know what the future holds, but I know I want you in it, however that looks. She leaned forward, pressing a gentle kiss to my cheek, her lips warm against the cool evening air. Good night, Jack. Good night, Sarah. As I drove away, I realized that, for the first time in a long while, I felt okay. Not perfect, not whole, but okay. And for now, that was enough. When I got to Sarah's, the smell of lasagna hit me before I even stepped inside. She greeted me at the door, her eyes bright, a bit of flour on her cheek, and her hair pulled back in a messy bun. She gave a little laugh, brushing the flour off as I pointed to it, and for a moment, I forgot all about the past few months. It was just us, and a warm, inviting home. We set the table together, lighting a small candle in the middle, making the whole place feel cozy. As we ate, we talked about everything and nothing: old movies, favorite songs from high school, even the silly things we wanted to do now that we were both technically single again. For the first time in what felt like ages, I was genuinely laughing, and it felt like a weight was lifting off my chest with every chuckle. After dinner, we tackled the dishes side by side, splashing each other playfully as we washed up. At one point, she flicked soap suds at me, and I retaliated, making her laugh, that unguarded laugh that I'd grown to love. Standing there, elbow deep in soap and laughter, I realized how grateful I was for these small, simple moments. When the last dish was dried, she wiped her hands and looked up at me, her expression soft and warm. "Jack, I don't know where this is going, and honestly, I'm still figuring things out. But I want you to know that having you here, it just makes things easier." I felt my heart beat a little faster. I reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "Sarah, I don't know what the future holds either. But I know I want you in it, however that looks." For a moment, she just looked at me, her eyes filled with a quiet strength that had helped me keep going. Then, without saying a word, she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around me. I held her close, feeling the steady rhythm of her heartbeat against my chest, and let myself sink into the warmth of that embrace. When we pulled back, she smiled up at me, a little shy but genuine. "Stay a while?" she asked softly. I nodded, and we settled on her couch with mugs of tea, sharing quiet conversation until the stars came out. For the first time in months, I felt grounded, as if finally, there was something to look forward to again. The nights I spent with Sarah became a quiet anchor in my life. We'd meet a few times a week, usually over a meal or just sitting together on her couch with tea, talking until the early hours. There was no rush to label it, no pressure to define what we were doing. It was simply enough. One evening, we ended up on her back porch, wrapped in blankets as the first chill of winter crept in. The stars were bright, clear in the crisp air, and we sat close, our shoulders brushing. After a while, she looked at me thoughtfully. "Do you ever wonder where we'd be if none of this had happened? If they hadn't," she paused, searching for the words. "If they hadn't betrayed us?" I took a moment, looking up at the sky. "Sometimes," I admitted. "But I don't think about it as much anymore. I think, maybe we'd still be in those old lives, trying to hold things together that weren't meant to be." She nodded, leaning her head on my shoulder. "Yeah. And maybe we'd have missed this." She gestured between us, her hand lingering on mine. "The chance to actually be with someone who understands." I turned to her, feeling the weight of her words. "I don't regret finding this with you, Sarah. Not even a little." She smiled softly, her eyes meeting mine. The warmth in her gaze felt like an invitation, and without another word, I leaned in, pressing my lips to hers. The kiss was gentle, unhurried, a quiet promise that whatever had brought us here wasn't over yet. When we finally pulled back, she held my hand a little tighter, her expression peaceful. "Thank you, Jack, for being here." I squeezed her hand, feeling the same peace settle over me. "I'm not going anywhere." And I meant it. As winter deepened, Sarah and I spent more time together, finding warmth in each other's company against the chill outside. We were still taking things slow, but our connection was undeniable. It wasn't the hurried excitement of new love, it was something steadier, more honest. Two people who'd seen the worst in their partners and found comfort in each other's presence. One weekend, Sarah suggested we go out of town, maybe rent a cabin upstate and escape for a bit. "We both need a break from everything," she'd said, her eyes bright with excitement. I couldn't argue with that. We booked a cabin nestled in the woods, just a few hours away, with plans for a weekend of quiet, good food, and hiking. The drive up was filled with laughter and easy conversation. Sarah hummed along to songs on the radio, and I couldn't help but watch her, feeling grateful for every moment that had led us to this one. When we finally pulled up to the cabin, it was everything we'd hoped for: small, cozy, with a stone fireplace and a view of the trees stretching out endlessly behind it. After unpacking, we decided to take a walk before the sun set. The snow was fresh, blanketing everything in a soft white glow. Our footsteps crunched as we made our way down the narrow trail behind the cabin, the silence of the woods wrapping around us like a blanket. Every so often, we'd stop to take in the view or catch our breath, smiling at each other with that unspoken understanding between us. At one point, Sarah slipped on an icy patch, grabbing onto my arm to steady herself. She laughed, her cheeks pink from the cold. "You're officially my hero now," she said, still holding onto my arm. "Happy to be of service," I teased, but the moment felt bigger than that. There was something grounding in her touch, something real. When we got back to the cabin, we made dinner together, just a simple pasta, but it felt like a feast. We opened a bottle of wine and sat on the floor by the fireplace, talking and laughing, sharing stories about our pasts, the things we'd rarely discussed with anyone. The warmth of the fire and the glow of the wine made everything feel distant, like we'd left all our troubles far behind. After a while, we fell into a comfortable silence, the fire crackling softly. Sarah leaned her head on my shoulder, and I wrapped my arm around her, pulling her closer. She looked up at me, her expression gentle, vulnerable. "Jack, I never thought I'd feel like this again," she said quietly, her fingers tracing small circles on my arm. "I thought I'd lost my chance for something real." I held her gaze, feeling the weight of her words. "You didn't lose anything, Sarah. If anything, we both gained something better. Something honest." She smiled, her eyes shining. "I think you're right." Without thinking, I leaned down and kissed her, this time deeper, more certain. She responded, her hand resting against my cheek, pulling me closer. It was a kiss filled with all the quiet promises we hadn't spoken yet, all the hope that had been building between us. When we finally pulled back, we stayed close, just holding each other. That night, as we lay together, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: contentment. It wasn't a grand, sweeping feeling. It was subtle, like a quiet assurance that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Lying there with Sarah, her breathing soft and steady beside me, I felt a peace settle over me that I hadn't thought possible after everything that had happened. The weekend passed in a blur of small moments like that. Coffee in the mornings while watching the sun rise over the trees, afternoons spent hiking through the snow-covered trails, and evenings by the fire, wrapped in blankets and each other. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again, like I was finally healing. On our last night, we sat out on the porch, bundled up and sipping hot chocolate, watching the stars blink above us. Sarah leaned into me, her head resting on my shoulder. "Jack, do you think this could be something lasting?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her question. But I didn't hesitate. "I do, Sarah. I really do. I think we were both meant to go through what we did, so we'd find each other." She smiled, her hand finding mine and squeezing it gently. "I feel the same." We sat there in silence, hand in hand, watching the stars, knowing that whatever came next, we'd face it together. When we got back from the cabin, it felt like the beginning of a new chapter. The weight of the past was still there, lingering in moments when our eyes would meet, or when one of us would fall quiet mid-sentence, lost in thought. But there was also something else: hope, the feeling that maybe we were finally moving forward together. A few nights after our trip, Sarah invited me over for dinner. When I arrived, I could tell she'd put in extra effort. Her small dining table was set with candles, the soft glow making her home feel warm and intimate. The scent of rosemary and garlic filled the air, and she looked up with a smile as I walked in, her cheeks flushed from cooking. "I may have gone a little overboard," she laughed, gesturing to the table. "It looks amazing," I replied, genuinely touched. "Thank you for doing all this." She gave a little shrug, trying to play it off, but I could see the emotion in her eyes. "It's nothing, really. I just thought, well, we both deserve a nice night." Dinner was wonderful. Sarah had cooked a perfect roast chicken with vegetables, and every bite felt like the warmth and care she'd poured into it. We lingered over our meal, sharing stories, laughter, and reflections. The conversation drifted easily from the lighter moments of our past to the deeper unspoken feelings about where we were now. At one point, Sarah grew quiet, tracing the edge of her wine glass. "You know, I've been thinking about all the things I gave up in my marriage," she said, her voice soft, almost as if she was talking to herself. "The dreams, the little things that used to make me happy, like painting or hiking alone on weekends. They all just slipped away over time. I think I molded myself so much to fit what Chad wanted that I lost parts of who I was." I listened, my heart heavy with understanding. "I get it. I did the same with Jane. I can't even remember the last time I did something just for me. I was so focused on being the partner she wanted, the husband who was always there. I forgot to think about what I wanted." She looked at me, her eyes searching. Do you think it's possible to find those pieces of ourselves again? I reached across the table, taking her hand. I think we already are. Piece by piece, moment by moment. And I think, maybe that's part of why we're here together. To help each other find what we lost. Her face softened, a mixture of gratitude and vulnerability that made me feel closer to her than ever. She squeezed my hand, her thumb gently brushing over my knuckles. Thank you, Jack. For being here, for understanding. For not letting me go through this alone. After dinner, we moved to the couch, a comfortable silence settling over us as we sank into the cushions. Sarah nestled against my shoulder, and I wrapped my arm around her, feeling her warmth seep into me. The television played quietly in the background, but neither of us paid much attention to it. After a while, she looked up at me, her eyes warm and filled with a question. Jack, have you ever thought about us? I mean, really thought about what this could be? I hesitated, not because I didn't know the answer, but because the feelings were so raw, so new. Every day, I admitted softly. I think about you, about what we're building together, and how I want this to be more than just a temporary thing. Her face lit up, a hint of surprise and relief mingling together. I didn't expect to feel this way about anyone, not after everything. But with you it's different. It feels safe, real. Her words hit me deeply, and I brushed a strand of hair behind her ear, letting my fingers linger on her cheek. I feel the same way, Sarah. I want this to be something lasting, not just a phase or a way to fill the void. I want this to be real. She leaned into my hand, closing her eyes, and for a moment we stayed like that, just feeling the closeness, the warmth that had been so absent in our lives for so long. Then, as if drawn together by an invisible force, we moved closer, our lips meeting in a kiss that was both tender and full of promise. It was unhurried, deepening slowly, each of us savoring the moment. When we finally pulled back, she looked up at me, her expression a mix of vulnerability and hope. This is scary, you know. Opening up like this, after everything we've been through. I nodded, brushing my thumb along her cheek. It is. But maybe that's what makes it worth it. The fact that we've both been broken, but we're willing to try again. Her smile was soft, understanding. Thank you, Jack. For seeing me, for being here. We stayed close, holding each other as the evening stretched on, talking about our dreams, our fears, the lives we wanted to create for ourselves. There was no rush, no need to push anything further than where it naturally went. We simply existed together, wrapped in a warmth that felt like a balm for the wounds we both carried. Later, as I got ready to leave, Sarah walked me to the door. She took my hand, holding it tightly, and for a moment, neither of us said anything. Then she looked up, her eyes shining. Promise me you'll be here tomorrow? I leaned down, brushing a kiss across her forehead. I'll be here, Sarah. For as many tomorrows as you need. And as I left, I knew that wasn't just a promise to her. It was a promise to myself, a commitment to rebuild, to let go of the past, and to step forward into something real, something we both deserved.